What would you do if your HOA suddenly decided that everything you loved about your home was a violation? Imagine waking up one morning, stepping outside with your coffee, and finding a bright orange flyer taped to your mailbox, the kind of obnoxious color that practically screams bad news. That's exactly how my nightmare began. I barely made it past the bold, blocky headline before my stomach twisted into a knot. Attention residents, effective immediately, all swimming pools are banned. I blinked, rereading it, convinced I must be misunderstanding. But no, the words stayed the same. Not just new pools, existing ones had to be removed. Within 30 days. Or else. I glanced over at my backyard, where my perfectly maintained, crystal-clear pool shimmered in the morning sun. This wasn't just a pool. It was the heart of my summers, the center of neighborhood barbecues, the place where my kids learned to swim, where we laughed, relaxed, and made memories. It wasn't some neglected eyesore, it was a backyard paradise. And now, according to some ridiculous new HOA rule, it had to go. I flipped the flyer over, my confusion rapidly turning to anger. The new rule had been passed under the leadership of Karen, the newly appointed HOA president. Of course it was Karen. The same Karen who had been complaining about the neighborhood for months, about lawns that weren't trimmed to standard, about trash cans being left out 5 minutes too long, about kids playing too loudly in their own yards. And now, she had decided that pools were a disruption to neighborhood harmony. Harmony? My pool had created harmony. It was where neighbors gathered for pool parties, where kids splashed happily instead of being glued to their screens. It wasn't an eyesore, it was the best part of this community. Then, I saw the real kicker. A hefty daily fine for non-compliance. Failure to remove the pool would result in further legal action. And that's when I knew. This wasn't about the community. This was personal. Karen wasn't banning pools because she cared about aesthetics, she was doing it because she wanted my pool gone. The moment I decided to fight back, I knew I couldn't just go for a simple workaround. No, if I was going to push back against Karen's absurd power grab, it had to be bold. It had to be ridiculous. It had to be something so petty, so over the top, that it would drive her absolutely insane. And that's when it hit me. If I couldn't have a pool, I'd have a moat. The idea started as a joke, a fleeting thought fueled by frustration, but the more I considered it, the more it made sense. A moat wasn't a pool. A moat was a natural water feature. It was landscaping, not recreation. It didn't violate any rules, not technically. And most importantly, it would make Karen lose her mind. By the next morning, I was on the phone with Bob Turner, the owner of a local excavation company. Bob was a big guy with a permanent smirk, the kind of man who had seen his fair share of crazy requests and was always up for a challenge. When I told him what I wanted, he scratched his head and said, "So, you want a trench? Bigger. How big we talking?" I grinned. Think medieval. Think defensive. Bob's eyes lit up, and he let out a low chuckle. Now that I can get behind. The digging started the following week. The roar of heavy machinery filled the air as Bob's crew went to work, carving a deep, winding trench around my entire property. My neighbors watched with a mix of curiosity and concern, murmuring among themselves as the trench grew wider and deeper. I knew they were wondering what the hell I was doing, but I wasn't about to explain. Not yet. Karen, of course, wasn't just watching, she was seething. She drove by my house at least 3 times a day, slowing her pristine white SUV to a crawl as she squinted at the construction site, her face twisting in suspicion. I overheard her once, during one of her surveillance runs. She had her usual sidekick, Susan Miller, sitting in the passenger seat. "What is he doing now?" Karen hissed, gripping the steering wheel like she wanted to strangle it. Susan peered over the dashboard, unimpressed. "Looks like landscaping?" Karen scoffed. Landscaping? That's not landscaping. That's a ditch. Susan shrugged. Maybe it's a Zen garden? Karen's eyes narrowed. A Zen garden? That's the least Zen thing I've ever seen. I smiled and waved at them from my porch, letting them stew in their confusion. Let them wonder. Let them stress. As the trench neared completion, Karen couldn't hold back any longer. She stormed up my driveway one evening, armed with her ever-present clipboard and a scowl that could curdle milk. "Jim," she snapped, barely containing her rage. "We need to talk." I took a sip of my beer, leaning casually against my truck. "Sure, Karen. What's on your mind?" She gestured wildly at the trench. "What the hell is this?" I looked over my shoulder as if noticing it for the first time. "Oh, that? Just a little landscaping project." "Landscaping?" she repeated, eyes bulging. "Jim, that's a damn moat." I raised an eyebrow. "A moat? Karen, come on. That would be ridiculous." Her jaw tightened. "You can't dig an enormous trench around your property. It's disruptive. It's ugly. It's a safety hazard." I shrugged. "Funny, you didn't seem to care when I had a pool." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "This is different." "How?" I asked innocently. She faltered, glancing at the trench, at my house, at me. I could see the gears in her head turning, desperately trying to find a rule, any rule, that I was breaking. Finally, she straightened her shoulders. "I'll be checking with the HOA board. I'm sure there's something in the regulations about." "Go for it." I cut her off, giving her my best smug grin. "Let me know what you find." She huffed, turning on her heel and stomping back to her SUV, but I didn't miss the way her hands trembled as she gripped the steering wheel. She was losing control, and she knew it. The next morning, I woke up to another HOA violation notice on my doorstep. A $1,500 fine. I barely had time to curse before I noticed something else. The fine had already been allocated to the HOA beautification fund. And the first project? A brand new decorative entrance sign, right in front of Karen's house. I stared at the notice in disbelief, then back at the half-dug moat in my yard. "All right, Karen. You want to play dirty? Let's play." The day the water trucks arrived, I made sure to be outside, casually sipping my coffee as thousands of gallons of water gushed into the trench, turning it from a dry, yawning chasm into a shimmering body of water. The early morning sun reflected off the surface like a miniature lake, and for the first time, the moat truly looked complete. I had outdone myself. By midday, the drawbridge was installed, a ridiculously oversized, fully functional wooden bridge, complete with a crank mechanism that groaned dramatically when raised or lowered. It served no real purpose other than sheer pettiness, but that was the entire point. The best part? The landscaping. I had lined the edges with stone, planted lily pads on the water's surface, and stocked it with koi fish, guppies, and goldfish, all perfectly harmless, all completely within HOA guidelines for natural water features. It was absurdly beautiful. And Karen absolutely lost it. I was in my backyard when I heard the telltale screech of her white SUV skidding to a stop. The sound of a car door slamming violently shut followed, and then came the rapid, furious clicking of Karen's heels against pavement. I barely had time to brace myself before she rounded the corner into my yard, clutching her clipboard like it was a weapon. "Jim," she shrieked, voice cracking under the weight of her fury. "You built a damn moat." I turned, feigning surprise. "A moat?" I glanced at the water, then back at her. "Karen, that's a little dramatic, don't you think?" Her face turned a dangerous shade of red. "Dramatic? Dramatic?" She pointed a trembling finger at the water. "You have a body of water encircling your entire property. I nodded. It's a natural water feature, Karen. Her eyes bulged. What? I gestured toward the meticulously arranged stonework, the floating lily pads, the aesthetically pleasing koi fish gliding beneath the surface. It enhances the neighborhood's beauty. It's calming. It promotes harmony. Karen's mouth opened and closed, like a fish gasping for air. Then she turned on her heel and stormed off. Within an hour, I received a HOA emergency notice, a demand to drain the moat immediately, citing community safety concerns. I expected this. I also expected that Karen would try every dirty trick in the book to shut me down. And I was right. That evening, while I was sitting on my porch admiring my handiwork, I noticed a strange figure lurking near the water's edge. It took me all of 5 seconds to realize it was Karen, holding a bucket of what looked like stagnant, greenish water. She was trying to stage a mosquito infestation. I watched, sipping my drink, as she sneakily dumped the foul-smelling liquid into my moat before scurrying back toward her SUV, thinking no one had seen her. She was about to have a very bad morning. The next day, a county health inspector arrived at my property, clipboard in hand. "We received a report that your water feature is causing a severe mosquito infestation," he said, adjusting his glasses. "Really?" I asked, frowning. "That's odd. I installed a mosquito prevention system last week." Karen appeared out of nowhere, smirking like she had already won. "You should check the water," she suggested sweetly. "It looks contaminated." I led the inspector over to the moat. He peered in, studied the fish, examined the water clarity, and jotted down notes. After a few minutes, he turned to Karen with a completely neutral expression. "There are no mosquitoes here." Karen blinked. "What?" "The filtration system is working perfectly. Water quality is within regulations." He turned to me. "You're in full compliance, Mr. Carter." I smirked. "Oh, that's a relief." Karen's jaw clenched. And then, I dropped the bombshell. "By the way," I added, casually pulling out a USB drive from my pocket, "I happened to catch something interesting on my security cameras last night. A certain someone trespassing and dumping questionable substances into my legally maintained water feature." Karen's smug expression shattered. The inspector's eyebrows shot up. Karen stammered. That's ridiculous. He's lying." I plugged the USB into my laptop, flipped it around, and pressed play. The crystal-clear footage showed Karen sneaking onto my property, lugging that suspicious bucket, and dumping it right into the moat. The inspector's face darkened. "Ma'am," he said sharply, "do you have an explanation for this?" Karen looked like a fish caught on a hook, flipping and gasping for air. I grinned. Checkmate. That night, I celebrated. I strung up fairy lights around the moat, set up a lounge chair, and poured myself a drink. Karen, defeated but not finished, was going to escalate. I could feel it. And that was exactly what I wanted. The battle should have ended there. Any reasonable person would have accepted defeat, packed up their clipboard, and moved on with their life. But Karen? Karen wasn't reasonable. After the security footage scandal, she had gone eerily quiet, which should have been a red flag. I had embarrassed her, proven her corruption, and made her look like an absolute joke in front of the HOA and county officials. And yet, she didn't retaliate. At least, not right away. Then, one morning, I noticed a new HOA notice taped to my door. Due to safety concerns, the HOA will be filing a lawsuit against homeowner James Carter for maintaining an unsafe and hazardous water feature in a residential neighborhood. I read it twice, then burst out laughing. Karen had officially lost her mind. She was suing me. I had anticipated complaints, fines, even an escalation to the HOA board, but a lawsuit? She was so desperate to win that she had gone nuclear. Unfortunately for her, I had done my homework. A lawsuit required actual evidence of a hazardous moat, and so far, Karen had nothing. I showed up to court prepared. She, on the other hand, looked frazzled, her power suit slightly wrinkled, clutching a stack of papers that I already knew wouldn't help her case. Karen's lawyer stood up first. "Your Honor, this man has constructed a moat around his property." A moat. This is a blatant safety hazard, an environmental nightmare, and an insult to our community standards. I didn't even try to hide my smirk. When my turn came, I calmly produced every permit, regulation, and report proving that my moat was completely legal. The health inspector's findings, the landscaping classification, even an email from the HOA's own attorney confirming I wasn't violating any bylaws. The judge skimmed the documents, then turned to Karen. "Ms. Nichols, do you have any evidence that this moat is hazardous?" Karen stammered. It's common sense. It's dangerous. What if someone drowns?" The judge raised an eyebrow. "Has anyone drowned?" Karen's mouth opened, then closed. The judge sighed, clearly unimpressed. "Mr. Carter is in full compliance with all regulations. This case is dismissed." And just like that, Karen lost again. But she wasn't done. Oh no. That evening, as I was relishing my latest victory, I had a brilliant idea. If Karen wanted to accuse me of creating a dangerous moat, well, maybe I should lean into it. That's when I put up the signs. Big, bold, caution, live alligators. It was completely fake, of course. But Karen didn't know that. And oh, how she lost her mind. For the next few days, she drove past my house multiple times a day, her eyes darting toward the moat, probably expecting to see a prehistoric monster lurking beneath the surface. Then, she did something spectacularly stupid. Late one night, she snuck onto my property. I was watching from my window, hot chocolate in hand, as she crept toward the water's edge, flashlight beam skimming the surface. "There's nothing there," I heard her mutter. "It's fake. He's bluffing." And then, the bridge gave way. I might have loosened the bolts earlier. Just a little. Karen let out a shriek as she tumbled headfirst into the moat, her clipboard flying one way, her phone the other. The splash was magnificent. She emerged soaked, gasping, covered in lily pads and fish slime, looking less like an HOA president and more like a swamp creature. And the best part? My security cameras caught the whole thing. Within hours, the footage was all over social media. The internet went wild. Karen, once the feared tyrant of the HOA, was now a meme. Moat Monster Karen. The HOA Queen of the Swamp. The Lillipad Lady. The humiliation was unbearable for her. And just when she thought it couldn't get any worse, I took it one step further. Because if I was going to warn people about alligators, well, I might as well get some. The HOA was in complete chaos. Karen had gone from dictator to laughingstock in a matter of days, thanks to her moat fiasco going viral. She stopped showing up to HOA meetings, barely left her house, and when she did, neighbors snickered behind her back. The once feared tyrant of the neighborhood was now just Moat Monster Karen. And then came the final blow. Word started spreading that Karen had secretly built an indoor pool, after banning pools for everyone else. The hypocrisy was too much, even for her most loyal HOA minions. The board turned on her. The neighbors demanded her resignation. And, with no way to spin the narrative, Karen finally caved. Her resignation letter was as bitter as you'd expect, blaming community hostility and targeted harassment for her decision, never once admitting that she was the problem. But none of that mattered. She was out. And then? The unthinkable happened. An HOA election was held. I hadn't even planned on running. I thought I had won just by getting Karen to step down. But then my neighbors started egging me on, saying that if anyone deserved to be in charge, it was the guy who had fought back and won. So I ran. And I won. By a landslide. My first act as HOA president? Repealing every ridiculous rule Karen had ever passed. The pool ban? Gone. The outrageous fines? Refunded. The absurd, nitpicky regulations? Erased. And to ensure no future HOA tyrant could pull a Karen, I wrote a new bylaw. No HOA president could implement a rule that personally benefited themselves. Karen, of course, was furious. But she was powerless. And just to put the final cherry on top, I built a floating tiki bar in the middle of my moat, accessible only by rowboat. It became the spot in the neighborhood, with people coming over just to hang out, sip drinks, and enjoy the ridiculous victory over HOA tyranny. And the best part? The HOA never messed with me again. Because, at the end of the day, what were they going to do? Ban moats? Have you ever had to deal with an HOA nightmare or a Karen on a power trip? What's the pettiest way you've ever fought back? Let's hear your best stories below.